Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Nextdoor NetAdmin. Here's a question for you. What's the relation between a registrar and DNS? For that matter, how about the name servers for your domain name? This is a question that some people might be really familiar with already, but others might not. So let's talk about it briefly. Think about how DNS is structured. You've got root servers, 13 root servers, and they tell people where to go to look up .com or .org or .ca or any of those other domain names that you're familiar with. Where are those servers kept? Who runs them? Well, as it happens, ICANN, which is the entity that looks after all of the domain naming scheme to make sure that everybody's on the same page, ICANN determines who runs those registries, and those are the top level domain registries. For example, VeriSign, I don't know if that's still their name or whether that's changed in some sort of corporate merger along the way. VeriSign operates the .com registry. .org is managed by the Public Interest Registrar, or PIR. And .ca is operated by CIRA, the Canadian Internet Registration Authority. So each one of these top-level domains is run or operated by a particular group, corporation, however you want to phrase it, whatever they are. But that doesn't mean that you have to go to that registrar. It doesn't create a monopoly, and that's by design. Nobody wanted to say, oh, which corporation in the world is going to be uniquely blessed with the opportunity to make a mint by registering every .com domain name ever. Nobody wanted that. You need a single entity to operate the registry so that you don't have multiple competing .com registries. But access to those registries is given essentially to wholesalers. They sign a reseller agreement with the registrar. They sign up to rules that say, here's what, the rules of conduct. You're allowed to register a domain name for a user. You're not allowed to speculatively register names because you think they're going to be valuable at some point in the future. You're a wholesaler. You're a reseller. You don't get to do that stuff. You can't overwrite somebody else's registration unless you go through the proper procedures for the user to indicate that they are actually transferring the registration of the domain name. Basic rules like that. When a company signs off on that, they're granted access to use the registrar's APIs to register domain names and update the domain names. And then they, in turn, the company with the reseller agreement, can set themselves up as a registrar as well. And you can go to them and say, hi, I'd like to buy a .com. I'd like to buy a .ca. Whatever domain name you're interested in that they actually resell. This is also why you can sometimes run into limitations where your registrar of choice can't sell you the domain name you want. If they don't have a reseller agreement with the operator of that registry, then they don't have access. It's not a thing that they can do. And because a reseller agreement isn't free to execute, there's some cost involved. It may not be worth it for them to actually go to the trouble of setting up an agreement with the other registrar. This is something that you might find with some of your boutique domain names like .house or .disco. I don't know if there is a .disco. Is there? I haven't checked. I know there's a .house. Yeah, things like that. .zip. That was Google's idea. It wasn't a very good one. But So when you go and register a domain name, example.org, your registrar says, okay, so I'm going to create a record in the registry operators records, and I'm going to say that example.org now exists. And it has some data associated with it. It has a list of contacts that go into WHOIS, and it also has name servers associated with it. And you might go, why does it have name servers associated with it? Because the way that DNS is structured, the root servers can tell you where to go to get to .com, .ca, .org, etc. But then those registries, when you say, hey, I'm looking for DNS records for example.org, that registry needs to say, well, we don't have all the information directly on that. You should go talk to those name servers over there. Okay. So along with the record of who owns the domain name, when it expires, etc., you need to have name server records in there. And all registrars have a way for you to set the name servers to whatever you want. Most of them will have some sort of a DNS interface available, and they'll default to their own name servers. They already have to be hooked up to DNS anyway, just to register the domain name. So it's not that much more difficult for them to say, okay, here, you can make some A records, point it to your website, an MX records so people know how to email you. Yeah, sure, you can do that too. It may not be fully featured. It may or may not offer all the record types that you want, but they'll always have the ability to point the name servers for your domain wherever you want, because that's a requirement of the entire structure. It's one of the rules they sign up to. You can't lock people into your own service. You have to let them point this wherever they want, including to their own servers if that's what they want to do. So when you transfer registrars, what happens? Well, along with going through the whole process of getting authorization codes and making sure that the domain is unlocked and everything else to authorize the transfer, what's going to happen? By default, when you move registrars, the new registrar is going to update those name servers. It's going to point them to its own servers by default. Well, what if your DNS was over somewhere else? Well, that means that when you transfer your domain name, suddenly everything that you have in DNS is going to go away from the perspective of everybody else, because they're no longer being pointed to the original servers. And there's two ways that you can address this. The first is just make sure you set up all your DNS records on the new registrar before the transfer completes. And then when the transfer completes, it already has all the DNS records and you're good to go. The other way to do this is wait until it transfers and then go in and update the two name server entries, or three, or however many you have, and point them back at the old server. And then you can say, okay, I'm transferring the registration of the domain name because you have cheaper prices, I like your support policy better, whatever you want, but you can still point DNS back to the original place because maybe you like their DNS editing interface better, or they have better redundancy, or it's what they specialize in, something like that. It's entirely possible to have the registrar in one location and DNS in another, and that's fine, because both the registrar and DNS are doing the same thing. The registrar is just doing it a little more directly by affecting the actual registration of the domain name. Now, here's another little twist. What if you want to say my name servers are nameserver1.example.org and nameserver2.example.org? How's anybody going to find that? If it says, oh, to find records for example.org, you need to talk to nameserver1.example.org. Well, where is that? Good registrars will also let you input glue records. Glue records are what makes the whole thing stick together in this case. Because every registrar has the ability to modify DNS as a function of registering new domain names, if you want to put in custom name servers, that's fine, but you also need to add a glue record of an A name or two at the registrar, so that the registrar can say, for example.org, go talk to nameserver1.example.org, and here's an additional A record that I've happened to input that says, and by the way, nameserver1.example.org is at IP address 123. Blah, 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 blah. Fine, then it works. So if you're going to do custom name servers, you also need to make sure that you have the ability to put in a glue record if the name server is under the domain that you are modifying. Obviously, if I'm setting up example.org and I want to use name servers at example.com instead, well, that's fine. Then you can go find the records for example.com, and those will, have the DNS records for example.org. Fine. But if I'm using example.org and I want to have name servers under example.org, I got to make sure I have that glue record. Just a little tidbit for you. WHOIS. I mentioned that really briefly. What is WHOIS? WHOIS is a way for network administrators to look up the records for who is associated with the domain. If you have spam hitting you, if you have major problems with traffic that appears to be coming from a website, whatever, it may be useful for you to look up the WHOIS on the domain. And there's typically 4 contacts. One is the administrative contact, the person who makes the decisions. One is the billing contact, mostly useful for the registrars, honestly, because nobody else cares who's paying for it. The technical contact, that's one that we're interested in as network administrators, because we want to know who the technical contact is if things are going sideways. And the last one is the owner. That's an important one. The owner is who owns the domain. Pretty self-explanatory. You may be familiar with some privacy services. A common one that I see is domains by proxy. I've also seen myprivacy.net. I've seen a few different of these. And they all work by substituting themselves into the WHOIS. And usually, hopefully, the email address that they have actually forwards to the actual contact so that they can still be contacted without having their personal information exposed in the WHOIS records. Personally, WHOIS is supposed to be there so that other people can contact the person responsible if they need to. It's not done gratuitously. So I have a tendency to put my own information in there for the most part. There are some exceptions. If I'm doing something that's really, really public, like this. But there's one major exception to that, which is the name in the owner contact. The name in the owner contact, if there's ever a dispute that doesn't revolve around trademarks or copyright or something like that, which has to go through a long adjudication process, it's really kind of a bother. If there's any dispute over who actually owns the domain name. The name in the WHOIS record is considered authoritative. So if you have, domains by proxy owns this domain name, guess what? As far as ICANN is concerned, that is entirely true. That company owns your domain name, not you. They can do whatever they want with it, and nobody's going to stop them. They're the owner. So it's something to be aware of. Something I have seen is where they say, okay, your name needs to be in the owner field because that's how the owner is recognized. But we will replace all the rest of the record with this privacy service so that, people don't have your home address, phone number, email, etc. That's a middle ground, and it gives you a little bit of confidence that, hey, this company with the privacy service can't just run away with my domain name if they feel like it. So that's always nice. But what are the chances of this actually happening? Slim to none. I mean, most of the privacy service, if a privacy service ever did that and ran away with somebody's domain name, nobody would use their service anymore. So it's kind of a niche concern. It's not a huge concern, but it's one of those things that's interesting to know. So if, for example, you're registering a corporate domain name, the corporation probably wants to be listed as the owner, not an employee name who might get fired one day and then just take the domain name because, hey, they've been listed as the owner. You want to be careful about that. Always make sure that the owner properly reflects the corporation or the individual who owns the domain name. If you're modifying those records, that is your responsibility. Okay. So that's it for today. Kind of a short one, but there's your brief overview of what a registrar is, what they do, how it links with DNS, and some things to be aware of when you're editing WHOIS records. If you have thoughts on other things that you would like me to talk about, I'm stumbling over my words all of a sudden. Regardless, or if you want to tell me things to stumble over and make myself look like an idiot, you can do that too. In any case, if you have something to tell me, let me know right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door netadmin, and we will see you next time.